Good afternoon, and welcome to the online launch of Dr. Michela Calderaro's important book, Share Bliss, A Creole Journey. This launch is being hosted by the publisher, the University of the West Indies Press. We are live streaming on the UE Press YouTube channel. Members of the University of the West Indies hierarchy, members of the University of the West Indies Press Board, members of the Library Association, specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen all, welcome and thank you for attending this event. I'm writer and visual artist Jacqueline Bishop. My most recent publication was The Gift of Music and Song, Interviews with Jamaican Women Writers, which was published January 28th of this year by People Tree Press. I'm also the author of The Gymnast and Other Positions, which was awarded the 2016 OCM Bocas Award in Nonfiction. I am an associate professor at New York University. The University of the West Indies Press has a long tradition of supporting the works of writers from the region and works about writers from the region. The University of the West Indies Press is a nonprofit scholarly publisher of books and journals in 16 academic disciplines. It is particularly well known for its work in Caribbean history, Caribbean cultural studies, Caribbean literature, gender studies, education, and political science. Founded in 1992, the press has over 500 books and journals in print. Its journals and books are peer-reviewed and approved by an editorial committee composed of local and international scholars. Share Bliss, A Creole Journey. This book, the resuscitation of a white Creole Jamaican woman writer who remained subsumed and hidden, indeed lost to so many of us, represents a labor of love carried on over several decades by Dr. Michela Calderaro. In so many ways, it was Michela's labor of love on the work of Eliot Bliss that brought us together several decades ago when we had our first meeting in front of Bob's Library at New York University in New York, when Michela, hands all over the place, started telling me about a white Creole writer, lesbian to boot, who I had heard nothing of before. Michela's work on Eliot Bliss and on Calabash, a Journal of Caribbean Arts and Letters, a journal I founded and edited for a decade at New York University, and which today is archived by NYU, would become the basis for us being in constant exchange around an intellectual body of work focused around the lives and works of Caribbean women writers. The well-known essayist and poet Shara McCallum had these words to say about Michela's labor of love, Share Bliss, A Creole Journey. We all know Jean Rhys, but now, out from under the shadows of her more famous contemporary, comes Eliot Bliss. Bliss, an early 20th century white Creole Jamaican lesbian writer. Bliss, whose out-of-print 1931 novel, Saraband Calderaro, first stumbles across in a bookshop in New York in 1998. Bliss, the absent figure Calderaro pursues throughout this book. The scholar, Michela Calderaro, reads into the past to recover Bliss, a writer she reveals as ahead of her time and not fit for her time or place in the world. Calderaro delivers Bliss back to the present through interviews conducted across many years with Bliss's lifelong partner, Patricia Allan-Burns. Through the recollections of editors and friends painstakingly tracked down, through letters and diaries recovered and meticulously pored over and pieced together. Calderaro's book is, like Bliss's own novels as we come to learn, genre-defying. One part biography, one part criticism, one part memoir, one part detective story, Sheer Bliss carries us on the treasure hunt Michela Calderaro enacted over 20 years of research and personal devotion to in solving the literary puzzle. Who exactly was Eliot Bliss, and why were she and her work forgotten? Calderaro answers in luminous prose, and what amounts to the most suspenseful excavation of a writer's life and lost than recovered legacies I've yet encountered. That's from the wonderful poet who Michela and I know and respect quite well, Shara McCallum. A few words about today's speakers. Born in Kingston, Jamaica, Jeffrey Philp attended Mona Primary and Jamaica College, where he studied literature under the tutelage of Dennis Scott. After leaving Jamaica in 1979, he went to Miami-Dade College, and after graduating, he studied Caribbean, African, and African-American literature and creative writing. As a James Michener Fellow at the University of Miami, he studied poetry with Kamau Brathwaite and fiction with George Lamming. Jeffrey today will bring us greetings.
Good afternoon. First, I'd like to thank the viewers who have tuned in and the University of the West Indies Press for inviting me to the launch of Sheer Bliss by Michela Calderaro. I'd like to begin by following Michela's example by saying how much I loved reading Sheer Bliss. The difference here, however, is that I'm an artist and I'm allowed to wear my heart on my sleeve, or to put it bluntly, to be weird. Critics, however, are supposed to be these stuffy people who are always proclaiming some ideal and then proceed to show us how far we've fallen from the ideal. And they should always, always stay out of the writer's personal lives. Or as Michela explains, a celebrated writer's grandchild once argued, "You have his books, why probe his life?" And sure, Michela does all the things that literary analysts are supposed to do. She places Bliss's work in the proper historical context, explains the genres to which the work belongs, connects the author with her contemporaries, such as Jean Rhys, and explains essential sections of the text. For example, she states, "Bliss's language is rich and sophisticated. Her poetry is never sloppy or boring. Her inventiveness with words is amazing, and her metaphors are daring and extreme." But Michela does a lot more in this unique book, and she breaks a few of the rules that critics are supposed to follow. In a way, by taking us along on her journey to discover Eliot Bliss's forgotten manuscript, Michela has created a pattern that I wish many younger critics would emulate. Let me explain. I am so tired of the critics nowadays who read a text and immediately try to fit the work into the Procrustean bed of the prevailing literary theories. They produce brilliant analyses that leave the synapses in my brain reeling, but in the end, they never touch my heart. This is not to say that Michela doesn't show off her critical chops when she writes lines such as, using the experimental tools of modernist fiction, Bliss exposed the delicate issue of creoleness, the interplay of race and gender, the impact of colonial heritage, and the tragedy endured during decolonization. To which I can only add, damn. But today, I'm not going to focus on the critical aspects of sheer bliss, which others such as Jacqueline Bishop and Evelyn O'Callaghan will do a far better job than I ever could. Instead, I want to focus on the elements that make Sheer Bliss a fascinating book, not only for a lapsed critic like myself, but also for anyone interested in reading about a journey towards the discovery of an identity that reads like a mystery or a detective novel with twists, turns, and red herrings. As Michela confesses, I felt I was embarking on a treasure hunt. I'm also suggesting that Michela has uncovered a unique method for combining attention to detail with intellectual rigor that we've come to expect in the best literary analysis. She also treats the people she encounters with the dignity and respect that we all desire. For example, I was touched by Michela's first meeting with Patricia Allan-Burns, where they sipped tea and drank soup. Michela didn't treat Patricia as a means to an end, someone to be checked off on a box and forgotten as she moved to the next project. Instead, the women had real relationship based on their love for each other and their love for Eliot Bliss's life and work. I would even venture to say that the reason why Patricia held on for so long is that she was waiting for someone like you, Michela, to come along and to write the story of Eliot Bliss's life. But then again, that's just me, the weird poet, speaking. Michela's compassion shines through the entire book. From the meetings with other scholars and her other BFFs, such as George Thompson, whom she described as the best librarian a scholar could ask for, to her inclusion of details about Bliss's cats. You could also read Sheer Bliss as a primer on how to do research, how to comb through indexes, write emails, and contact executors. But you will never find in any other work the delight that Michela feels when she makes a discovery. So Mrs. Goff was Sylvia. And isn't that what our life and work are supposed to be about? Delight. And here are passages of pure delight and lyrical grace in sheer bliss that make the poet in me squirm with envy. It was a beautiful day, cold and crisp. The sun was shining over the garden and the herbs yielded a strong fragrance. Puffs of smoke came out of her nose. She looked at me through that bluish curtain inquisitively. The sheen on my glasses made every petal and leaf shine. The old lock offered some resistance, but finally opened. Dust, folders, a moth-eaten, dusty scarf, parcels, something soft wrapped in whitish paper, more dust. When was the last time that you read beautiful passage like this in a book of criticism? And I'd only like to say, and to offer a warning, stay in your own lane, Michela. And finally, there's a scene that demonstrates why sheer bliss fascinates me. It's during Michela's first meeting with Patricia. She stood up suddenly. I'll make soup. You like soup, don't you? Uh, yes, of course. I do love soup. Had she offered it though, I would have loved poison too. See, there, she said it, not me. She said the word loved. Who'd have thunk it? A critic with a heart. Wonders never cease. But in all seriousness, Michela, thank you. Thank you for introducing us to Patricia Allan-Burns, George Thompson, and his band of merry librarians. And of course, Eliot Bliss, who always felt torn between different cultures. Thank you, Michela, for bringing our Caribbean mermaid back home. One love.
Evelyn O'Callaghan is Emeritus Professor of West Indian Literature, University of the West Indies, Cave Hill. Her published work includes articles and chapters on West Indian literature, particularly on women's writing, early Caribbean narratives, and more recently, eco-critical readings of Caribbean landscapes in visual and scribal texts. She has published woman version theoretical approaches to West Indian fiction by women, Women Writing the West Indies, 1804 to 1939, A Hot Place, Belonging to Us, and edited early Caribbean novels by Frida Cassin and Elma Napier. Most recently, she co-edited Caribbean Irish Connections and Madness in Anglophone Caribbean Literature on the Edge, as well as Volume 1 of Caribbean Literature in Transition. She's editor-in-chief of the Journal of West Indian Literature.
Well, I am the picture of the fusty Caribbean critic with my clunky headphones, but I had no choice because we had a kind of a technological glitch this morning. Anyway, let me get straight to my review of the novel, of Sheer Bliss. What makes a researcher tick? Not only Weir Jeffrey, but many of you have stayed up, I know, sleepless nights pontificating over this question. Not. What drives a researcher is curiosity, the need to find out. Michela Calderaro tells us in readable and enjoyable prose what drove her on her 20-year quest to find out more about Elliot Bliss. Her journey began in 1998. And mine started a bit earlier, at the beginning of the 1980s, when I was a temporary junior lecturer at the University of the West Indies in Jamaica. A visiting scholar called Trudear Harris gave a fascinating public lecture on early Black women's creative writing in the USA. And I thought to myself, but there must have been more right here in the Caribbean. I'm going to find out. Well, many years later, years of trawling through libraries in the region, but mostly overseas. This is long before the internet, my dears. Trawling through dictionaries of literary biography, academic bibliographies, and archives generally, a few Black Caribbean women writers did show up. So-called slave narratives by Mary Prince, 1831, and Florence Hall, undated, but early 1808 to 1820, and free-coloured Mary Seacole's autobiographical adventures, 1857. Then there's a gap of some 70 years until 1931, when Una Marson published a short story in The Cosmopolitan, a Jamaican magazine which she edited. That said, I found a lot of published work by white women in the Caribbean, in the West Indies, I should be more specific, including white Creoles like Jean Rhys, like Eliot Bliss, and Phyllis Shand Alfrey. Sheer Bliss is the kind of personal, very personal account of the kind of obsessive journey that informs researchers, as Jeffrey said, the twists, the turns it takes to find out, to find answers. She had found Bliss's first novel, Saraband, which was published in 1931, in a second-hand bookshop, with the information that the author was Jamaican-born and that she had been friends with Anna Wickham, Jean Rhys, and Dorothy Richardson. But she wants to know Elliot through her partner's eyes. And appropriately, she starts her narrative when she meets Patricia Allan-Burns, Bliss's significant other for some 60 years, in 2004. And slowly the details of Bliss's life start to emerge. Eileen Nora Bliss was born in 1903 in Jamaica to Eva Lees, who had come to live with her brother in Jamaica, and John Plomer Bliss, an English army officer of the West India Regiment who was stationed in Jamaica. At the age of 9, she was packed off to school in England at a series of convent schools. In 1923, she returned to Jamaica, but she found her beloved island changed and her parents' conservative, Anglo-centric colonial lifestyle suffocating, racist, and sexist. The story of this period, memories of her childhood, and the final decision to leave are the subject of Luminous Isle, her second novel. She stayed in Jamaica only 2 years, and by 1925 she was back in England. In London, writes Calderaro, she consciously cut any or most ties with her family, which was still in the colonies. Christened Eileen, she became Elliot. She had luscious, long auburn hair with golden highlights. She cut it. She'd been a faithful follower of the Catholic Church. She left it. She shared an apartment with her best friend from the convent days, the blonde, handsome, and talented pianist, Susan Courtnoyes. She led a tempestuous love life in London in the 1920s, had a break in Switzerland for some months, met Patience Ross, with whom she lived and whom helped her get published and find a job. Patricia, a young artist who also had accommodation in Ross's home. And when the relationship with Patience ended, Bliss turned to Pat. They were together for the rest of her life. From the time she returned to the UK, Eliot Bliss subscribed to modernist and feminist ideas, lived as a lesbian, and wrote her characters as female artists in a new post-war era. Her obituary claims that she chose Eliot in homage to both T.S. Eliot and George Eliot, and Calderaro compares her work to that of other modernist writers. The book consists of amazingly detailed, close readings and analysis of Bliss's 2 novels and, now published, collections of poems. Like Rhys and Alfrey and Elma Napier, who made her home in Dominica, Bliss details her protagonists totally identifying with the natural elements of their tropical homes, its landscapes, weather, sounds, smells. Calderaro is also sensitive and perceptive about about the plight of white Creoles who only really belong in Jamaica as children until adult prejudices and divisions of race, class, and gender polarize the Creole as neither one thing nor the other, neither English nor plantation aristocracy, neither black nor really white. Bliss's homosexuality is acknowledged, and desire and the expression of desire are always connected to Eliot's female figures, be it in Saraband or Luminous Isle, quoting from Sheer Bliss. Rebecca, a beautiful and independent Black woman who Eliot met on her return to the island, and whose paintings hangs in her and Patricia's home in Bishop Stortford, and is reproduced in the text, as are fabulously detailed photographs of Bliss, her family, and some of her watercolors, another talent that is unpacked in this wonderful book. Rebecca is for Calderaro perhaps one of the most interesting among Eliot's female characters. She becomes a friend of Bliss, and her house in the mountains was a sanctuary whenever Eliot wanted to hide from the garrison people. She's one of the few characters who keeps the name of the person that inspired the representation. More importantly, the text goes on, quote, "The relationship with Rebecca, both in fiction and in real life, never led to sexual consummation. Rebecca and all references to Eliot's attraction to Black women and her community is highlighted in various parts of the novel, that's Luminous Isle, and the impossibility of a closer relationship is among the motives of choosing exile." And I want to just read that one more time. The impossibility of a closer relationship is among the motives of choosing exile. Because this last points to one of the most insightful arguments in Calderaro's Sheer Bliss. And I quote, "While her heroines, following the same route she herself had chosen, affirm their independence and freedom from the patriarchal order and refuse to assume the canonical role of wife and mother, they never fully carry out her," meaning Eliot's, "life project. They never complete the journey towards that self-affirmation which Eliot sought and accomplished, to live in full her sexuality, fully aware of her choice. What her heroines lack is the articulation, or better, the freedom to articulate their sexual desire. Hence," she continues, "while many writers tend to let their characters achieve what they cannot do, in Bliss's case, the opposite is true." So there's a certain dichotomy between fictionalized reality and biographical reality, between dreams and the actualization of those dreams. And this, as Jeffrey pointed out, this subtly nuanced observation is completely inappropriate to a book which, as Shara McCallum notes on the cover, like Bliss's fiction, is genre-defying. I cannot emphasize this enough. Sheer Bliss, like Eliot's work, is genre-defying. It is one part biography, one part criticism, one part memoir, one part detective story. Sheer Bliss takes us on the treasure hunt that Calderaro had enacted over 20 years of research and personal devotion to solving a literary puzzle. And at the risk of repeating Jeffrey's quotation, this is the literary puzzle. Who exactly was Eliot Bliss, and why were she and her work forgotten? Well, even at the end of the text, Calderaro is not sure who Eliot Bliss was exactly. A British writer, she asks, a Creole writer, or arguably better, a lesbian writer? Whatever she was, for sure, we know her for sure a lot better now, and her work will not be forgotten again. The study acknowledges gratefully, as we all do as researchers, the assistance of librarians, curators, and publishers in accessing Bliss's papers. And she shares the palpable experience of finally being able to touch and read some of Eliot's letters and notes and photographs, which are generously shared with the reader. I was thrilled to learn about Bliss's poetry and to sample a taste of it in Sheer Bliss, and by the information that the University of Tulsa Library holds not just letters from Bliss to to Jean Rhys, but 19 volumes of Eliot's diaries, 1959 to 60, and from 1965 to 1980. Alas, many of the later diary entries make for depressing reading. The war made it impossible to stay in London, where shrapnel was falling, and Eliot and Patricia moved to different villages, ending up in Bishop Stortford in the 1950s. Like Rhys, Bliss felt cut off and isolated in the countryside from her literary circles and her friends in London, and worse, she was plagued with ill health. Especially after being diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, she was increasingly bedridden. And so some entries refer to being cold, to sadness, loneliness, depression. Yet they also testified that despite her painful hands, she was working on poems, on novels, on plays and short stories. Letters from a publisher unearthed from a trunk under Eliot's bed refers to a third novel, The Albatross, set in London around 1935, unfound now. And 2 folders of poems and the typescript of another novel returned to the wilderness. Finally, when Calderaro visits Alexandra Pringle, who published and edited Eliot's first 2 novels, republished and edited Bliss's first 2 novels for Virago Press, she's presented with the typescript of yet another novel, Hostile Country. Now, like all of Bliss's work, this is drawing on autobiographical material, and it's loosely based on Eliot and Patricia's move to the country. The 2 collections of poems, The Wild Heart and Spring Evenings in Stirling Street, took Calderaro over 2 years to compile and are now available on Amazon Kindle. Truly, her years of hard work and digging have yielded treasure. Bliss will be forever remembered as a writer who belonged neither to Britain nor to the West Indies, neither to the white nor to the black community of her homeland, but to multiple groupings, enabling her to live, as is so desired in Saraband, sexless, creedless, classless, free. There's so much more I could dwell on in relation to sheer Bliss. Eliot's obituary in the Sunday Telegraph of December 23, 1990, for instance, contains a fascinating list of the literary and artistic figures with whom she lived and worked. But I want to end here with huge congratulations to Michela on this achievement and doing so much for early Caribbean archival representation. And congrats to the UWI Press, of which I am a proud member of the editorial board, for their sensible decision to publish this wonderful new material. Thank you all.
Dr. Michela Calderaro has taught English and post-colonial literature in Italy and the USA. She was associate editor of Calabash, a journal of Caribbean arts and letters, editor of the Ford Maddox Ford newsletter, and creator of the original Ford Society website. At present, she is member of the editorial board of Il Tomello, a wonderful, wonderful post-colonial studies journal, which comes out of the University of Venice in Italy. Dr. Calderaro's critical works include a book on Ford Maddox Ford entitled A Silent New World, which came out in 1993, numerous articles on British, American, and Anglophone Caribbean writers, and a series of interviews with major Caribbean poets. In both her critical works and interviews, she tries to focus on issues of identity and memory, the way memory of the past is processed by artists, and how they deal with the connection of space and time in their works. She has edited a collection of Eliot Bliss's unpublished poems, Spring Evenings in Stirling Street. Today, we celebrate and launch her biography of Eliot Bliss, Sheer Bliss, A Creole Journey, recently published by the University of the West Indies Press.
I'm coming. Well, hi everybody. Can you hear me? So I hope you hear me because I don't really know. I am moved by the words of Jacqueline Bishop, Geoffrey Philp, and Professor Evelyn Callahan. I would also like to give a word of thanks to Erin McLeod of the University of West Indies Press, who saw the potential of my book. I mean, she liked it, and I was thrilled that I accepted to publish it because I had tried to publish it elsewhere, and I was refused. And this is something that I would like to say to younger professors, younger researchers: don't give up. Just with the poems, don't give up, go ahead. Now, who is Eliot Bliss? Whom I think she was, and what did she become? To me, Eliot Bliss was the subject of a search. I'm a very curious person. I'm a very curious researcher. And the fact that I had never heard of her and nobody I know had heard of her really puzzled me. I did not know what, there was no, the internet today is the main source, should not be, but it is the main source to find information. But when I started with Eliot Bliss, it was impossible to find. It is thanks to a friend of mine who was a librarian that I found out about the 19 volumes of letters, of diaries. And by the way, I would really like someone to go and read and transcribe the diaries, because for me, it was almost impossible to understand. Maybe there is somebody who can. There is something that I realized only lately when I was rereading the poems and comparing the poems of Eliot, Eliot's poems to her novels, both the published ones and the two that we found. I said in the book, and it is clear to everybody, that Eliot did not let her character live the same life she had, accomplish the same fullness, whatever she was. She didn't let her character, female character, become what she had become, that is sexless, classless, free, lesbian, openly. And why so? Because this probably would have had an impact on the public. How would the public react if the female characters had fulfilled their dreams? But in the poems, she actually let the female characters get what they want. The poems are extremely sensual, are clearly lesbian. And also, there are many others beside the ones that I published with Amazon. There are many other poems. And there is one poem that she dedicated to Anna Wickham that strikes me. And I'm going to read it now. Here, not only the love is clearly expressed, but I've always been told that the relationship with Anna Wickham was the relationship of a mother and a daughter, because there was so much difference in age. But actually, probably Anna regarded Eliot as a daughter, but I don't think Eliot regarded Anna Wickham as a mother. The poem's title is Use Me Thou with Beauty. to Anna Wickham. Use me thou with beauty, with the sea's edge on my mouth, with gold scalloped humor, with the trees of north and south, but never in languor and never in sloth. For my whip shall perceive thee and shall not be loth. This is clearly a love poem. So this is something else that is very interesting in Eliot and her writing. Finally, she let her character achieve freedom in the poem. Now, Jeffrey mentioned usually critics have boundaries. We don't go into the life, we enjoy the reading. I mean, the person I was referring to in the book who said that we have the book, let's not go into the life, is the grandchild of James Joyce. And I always thought that it is true. But when I got my hand on Eliot's diaries, I found a note. And in the note, she lists some acronyms that she uses in the diary. And she says, for whomever will read or try to read my diaries. So she wrote the diaries thinking that someone will eventually read them. And so will eventually bring her life back to life. And I felt better because I was feeling a bit uncomfortable, always said also to my students, don't mind, don't think of the life. You may not like the life of a writer, but you like his writing. And suddenly I had a writer who says, here I am, read me, read my life. And this made me feel better. So why should we read Eliot Bliss now? Because first of all, she should be read as historian. She reports the reality of what was happening in the colonies. I mean, lately I read something about Eliot Bliss, and she was referred as racist. She's not racist at all. The remarks that are racist in Luminous Oil are the remarks that her mother had made. That's certainly not Eliot. I mean, this is clear, if you really read the books. So they are breaking, they're groundbreaking. Her novels are groundbreaking. And they should always be read with this in mind. So they are very modern, beside being modernist in style. They're very modern. They describe, as ugly as it was, the reality of those years with a beautiful language. And they're feminist because, so we should read them in the feminist, as feminist genre, because they help women to understand that they can get whatever they want. They are books that push us towards freedom. And also they are lesbian, written in a period where being lesbian was not so easy. And they lead towards a lesbian literary tradition, which in those years was really in its germinal state. And also, to me, they are the full expression of a Creole identity. So they can be read within the canon of the Caribbean, within the Caribbean canon. And they constitute really a very gutsy endeavor to describe the reality of that period. It was not easy for her to write what she wrote. And the relationship with her family was a bit strained because of that, because of what she was writing. So these are the reasons why we should read them. beside the fact that they're beautifully written. And the prose is exceptional. So I'm really grateful for the possibility of talking about Eliot. I plagued my students, I'm retired now, but I plagued my students with my women writers from the Caribbean. And when I was telling the sad story of Eliot and Patricia and the poverty and the difficulties they had, I mean, some of them were even crying. They were all so into it. And it was exciting teaching those courses. So I'm glad now that my long search for bliss has resulted in this book. And I'm really grateful for the words of Jacqueline, Geoffrey, Evelyn. And also I'm really grateful I can see them, although from a distance. Thank you. If you have some questions. No questions? Not even from Geoffrey? Professor O'Callaghan? If somebody's still there.
How are you, Michela?
Hi, I'm fine.
I-
I'm locked in the house.
It was, and I just want to say again how thrilling it was to read this work.
It was thrilling writing it.
and I also liked as I said, the well, number one, your description of George Thompson, and going here and going here, the dead ends. No, I didn't find it here. It really brought out the trials of being a researcher, and in many ways, you know, it mimics my craft as a poet, because there are so many times you start writing something and it doesn't pan out, you know, and you have to put it aside, and then you have, you know, so you start with something else, and suddenly you have to go back digging into the waste paper basket, you know, because there was some gem buried there, and you unearth it and you come back to the work again. And I liked how you acted out that whole process of finding the gold in, you know, the mystery, the treasure hunt, the detective story. Hearts off to you. Congratulations. It was a wonderful read.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
You're a good friend.
Well, I can tell you, when I was reading it, I wasn't reading it as a friend. I was like, okay, let's see what she has to do here. And
yes.
Suddenly you caught me, you know, you caught me in your little world there, and you just kept pulling me along. And I'm like, how, you know, I'm supposed to be retired. Why am I reading this book of criticism? you just kept pulling me into the story. I enjoyed reading it.
Good.
Thanks again to everyone for attending this book launch. Particular thanks go out to Jeffrey Phelp and Evelyn O'Callaghan for their insightful comments and remarks. I especially want to recognize Michela Calderaro on this remarkable and wonderful achievement in pursuing Eliot Bliss for all these years and returning her once again to us in this amazing book. Purchase your copy of Sheer Bliss, A Creole Journey by Michela Calderaro at a special 30% launch discount at www.uepress.com. Trust me, you will be transported.